resolution of reconciliation, whereas the act of reconciliation is a bringing together of that which has been divided. And whereas when a community suffers a deep hurt, it is wise to address the harm. And a way to do this is to engage in restorative justice. And whereas restorative justice is a process whereby all identified stakeholders come together to collectively resolve an offense and then its impact on the present and the future. And whereas restorative justice creates space to build empathy and understanding between the victim and the offender for each other, and whereas the ultimate goal of restorative justice is to achieve a sense of healing by diligently and intentionally repairing the harm done to the victim, the offender, and the community. And whereas Friday the 13th in July of 1906 brought with it the tragic and brutal deaths of four white murder victims in Unity and the neighboring townships in Rowan County. And whereas the names and ages of these victims were Isaac Lillerly, 68, Augusta Behringer Lillerly, 42, John H. Lillerly, 8, and Alice Lillerly, 6. And whereas shock and despair propelled our Salisbury community towards violent action because the overt racial hatred for and racial violence towards African Americans in the United States and locally, and whereas the judge bearing responsibility for this case called in local military soldiers to maintain order because the officials in charge of the local government and the community were steeped in bias, bigotry, racism, violence, and hate, creating an environment which did not favor or provide due process and protection for those accused and detained. Let me pause there, excuse me. And whereas the soldiers being aligned with the same prejudiced beliefs as the local government officials and the community did nothing to stop the white mob from storming the county jail the night of August 6, 1906, and abducting three accused African American males. And whereas the names and ages of the accused were Jack Dillingham in his late 20s or 30s, Niece Gillespie, 55, and his son John Gillespie, 14 or 15, who were marched to a nearby field, and whereas the mob hung them by their necks from a tree, tortured and molested them, and lastly riddled their bodies with bullets, bringing more brutal death, and whereas this horrible occurrence in our city left a gaping, unresolved harm that taints present-day human interaction and stunts the growth of authentic equity and prohibits bone-deep healing. Now, therefore, be it resolved, we, the City Council of Salisbury, do hereby resolve to begin and participate in the reconciliation of process by apologizing for our government's role in this atrocity and formally acknowledging the unjust lynching of the four named African Americans in our community. We also offer our heartfelt condolences to all the descendants of those senselessly murdered on July 13th, 1906, by intruders and those murdered on August 6, 1906, due to the systemic and institutional violence based in racial hatred. We must work diligently to eradicate bias, prejudice, bigotry, violence, racism, and hate. and be intentional in our efforts to build fairness, open mindedness, peace, anti racism, and love. Welcome to Reading Books Part 9. Appreciate y'all tuning in. And I pray that everyone is gaining something and getting some insight and learning something and getting an idea of what it truly means to be of African descent and living in the United States. You know, I truly hope someone's getting an idea and an insight to what our ancestors went through and what they endured and what they had to overcome just for us to be here, living, breathing, talking, reading, and learning today. You know, there was a point in time during slavery, times that we weren't even allowed to read. And if we were caught reading or writing, it cost us our lives. And whoever was taught teaching someone how to read or write, it cost them their life as well. And torture and brutality and, you know, just complete atrocity. So let's continue to grow, continue to progress, continue to build, continue to learn, and continue to broaden our minds and our intellect and our vocabulary, and as well as our inspirations and our motivations as much as we can, and just continue to move forward. With that being said, we're going to jump back into Malcolm X autobiography. Uh, what I'm going to start doing as well is writing down words that I'm not familiar with and then just looking them up in the dictionary later on. I figure that's a good thing to do to help learn different words, learn more words, and broaden your vocabulary and your pronunciation. You see how I say that? Pronunciation. I couldn't even say that most of my life. I couldn't say that word. Pronunciation and exclamation mark. I couldn't say those two words for the majority of my life until maybe a couple years ago when I really started reading more. It's like reading actually helped my mind comprehend and how to fix my speech impediments and speech deficiencies. It's like it naturally fixed them. I believed in him not only as a leader in the ordinary human sense, but also I believed in him as a divine leader. I believed he had no human weaknesses or faults, and that, therefore, he could make no mistakes, and that he could do no wrong. There on a holy world hilltop, I realized how very dangerous it is for people to hold any human being to such esteem, especially to consider anyone some sort of divinely guided and protected person. My thinking had been opened up wide in Mecca. In the long letters I wrote to friends, I tried to convey to them my new insights into the American black man's struggle and his problems, as well as the depths of my search for truth and justice. I've had enough of someone else's propaganda. I had written to these friends. I'm for truth, no matter who tells it. I'm for justice, no matter who it is for or against. I'm a human being, first and foremost, and as a such, I'm for whoever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole. Largely, the American white man's press refused to convey that I was now attempting to teach Negroes a new direction. With the 1964 long hot summer steadily producing new incidents, I was constantly accused of stirring up Negroes. Every time I had another radio or television microphone at my mouth, when I was asked about stirring up Negroes or inciting violence, I'd get hot. All right, I think Why not, right? It takes no one to stir up the sociological dynamite that stems from the unemployment, bad housing, and inferior education already in the ghettos. This explosively criminal condition has existed for so long. It needs no fuse. It fuses itself. It spontaneously combusts from within itself. They called me the angriest Negro in America. I wouldn't deny that charge. I spoke exactly as I felt. I believe in anger. The Bible says there is a time for anger. They called me a teacher, a fomenter of violence. I would say point blank, that is a lie. I am not for wanton violence. I'm for justice. I feel that if white people were attacked by Negroes, if the forces of law prove unable or inadequate or reluctant to protect those whites from those Negroes, then those white people should protect and defend themselves from those Negroes using arms if necessary. And I feel that when the law fails to protect Negroes from whites' attack, then those Negroes should use arms if necessary to defend themselves. Malcolm X advocates armed Negroes. What was wrong with that? I'll tell you what was wrong. I was a black man talking about physical defense against a white man. The white man can lynch and burn and mob and beat Negroes. That's all right. Have patience. The customs are entrenched. Things are getting better. Well, I believe it's a crime for anyone who is being brutalized to continue to accept that brutality without doing something to defend himself. If that's how Christian philosophy is interpreted, if that's what Gandhian philosophy teaches, well, then I will call them criminal philosophies. I tried in every speech I made to clarify my new position regarding white people. I don't speak against the sincere, well meaning, good white people. I have learned that there are some. I have learned that not all white people are racist. I am speaking against, and my fight is against the white races. I firmly believe that Negroes have the right to fight against these races by any means that are necessary. But the white reporters kept wanting me linked with that word violence. I doubt if I had one interview without having to deal with that accusation. I am for violence if nonviolence means we continue postponing a solution to the American black man's problem just to avoid violence. I don't go for nonviolence if it also means a delayed solution. To me, a delayed solution is a non solution, or I'll say it another way. If it must take violence to get the black man his human rights in this country, I'm for violence exactly as you know the Irish, the Poles, Polish, or the Jewish would be if they were flagrantly discriminated against. I am just as they would be in that case. And they would be for violence, no matter what the consequences, no matter who was hurt by the violence. White society hates to hear anybody, especially a black man, talk about the crime the white man has perpetrated on the black man. I have always understood that's why I have been so frequently called a revolutionist. It sounds as if I have done some crime. Well, it may be the American black man does need to become involved in a real revolution. The word for revolution in German is Umwälzung. What it means is a complete overturn, a complete change. The overthrow of King Farouk in Egypt and the succession of President Nasser is an example of the true revolution. Interesting. Of course, the pen don't work. I know this one does. It means the destroying of an old system and its replacement with a new system. Another example is the Algerian Revolution, led by Ben Bella. They threw out the French who had been there over 100 years. So how does anyone sound talking about the Negro in America waging some revolution? Yes, he is condemning a system, but he's not trying to overturn the system or to destroy it. The Negro so-called revolt is merely an asking to be accepted into the existing system. A true Negro revolt might entail, for instance, fighting for separate black states within this country, with several groups and individuals have advocated long before Elijah Muhammad came along. When the white man came into this country, he certainly wasn't demonstrating any nonviolence. In fact, the very man whose name symbolizes nonviolence here today has stated, in quotes, our nation was born in genocide when it embraced the doctrine that the original American, the Indian, was an inferior race. Even before there were large numbers of Negroes on our shores, the scar of racial hatred had already disfigured colonial society. From the 16th century forward, blood flowed in battles over racial supremacy. We are perhaps the only nation which tried, as a matter of national policy, to wipe out its indigenous population. Moreover, we elevated that tragic experience into a noble crusade. Indeed, even today, we have not permitted ourselves to reject or to feel remorse for this shameful episode. We'll pause there. It's getting deep. It's getting really deep. Okay. Moving on. Jumping back into the Frederick Douglass story. Okay, where did I leave off here? There's definitely gonna be some words I'm writing down in this one. Okay, here. Colonel Lloyd himself, the owner of the great pirate ship, employer of the chief pirate Gore, in control of the captive deckhands, was hardly above employing the whip. At the stables at the Y plantation, Douglass observed, in quotations, a horse was seldom brought out to which no objection could be raised by either Lloyd himself or by his sons and sons-in-law. Old Barney, the head groom and stableman, had to endure these barbs and humiliations. One day, Colonel Lloyd was especially displeased with the appearance of one of his riding horses and took it out on old Barney. Lloyd ordered the, in quotations, bold and toil-worn man to kneel on the ground and laid 30 lashes with a horsewhip on his bare shoulders. Barney bore it patiently to the last, answering each blow with a slight shrug of the shoulders and a groan. This incident especially shocked Douglass. Not, it appears, for the blood drawn, but for the unspeakable humiliation of an old man of dignity and talent by the master himself. The beating of Barney, said Douglass, revealed slavery in its maturity of repulsive hatefulness. In a child's eyes and memories, something sick, frightful, or evil seemed to lurk around the corner of every building. In the sounds of every overseer's steps at the Y Enterprise, long after he had left the eastern shore behind. Such a prospect haunted Douglass. Quotations. Such is the constitution of the human mind. Douglass wrote in 1855, while trying to capture his mentality as an 8 and 9-year-old on the Y plantation. That, when pressed to extremes, it often avails itself of the most opposite ends. Extremes meet in mind as in matter, with a probity, like that one, probity, Probity, with a probity unmatched by any other slave narrative author. He remembered and analyzed a world of stark opposites, all but unalterable, extreme that he had to learn to understand, navigate, and survive. As his awareness of his as his as his awareness of his predicament grew, Frederick became a thinking being trying desperately to preserve and protect his mind as well as his body from internal disintegration and external destruction. At every turn in his life as a slave, both mind and body were in constant danger. His mind, he learned he could cultivate and protect more easily with more self-control. Douglas's experiences began to shape a disposition, a set of habits of mind, a personality that may have lasted all of his life. He was forever in search of a sense of home, a concept he dwelled on at length in the autobiographies. He was capable of great love and compassion, but perhaps even more desperately in need of receiving love and compassion long into adulthood. He experienced great difficulty trusting other people, even though even those who seemed to be friends. With mixed results, he sought time and again to find parental figures in whom to invest his faith and from whom to garner emotional sustenance. And his was a childhood. He and his was a childhood, he admitted, blessed with several turns of good fortune altogether, uncommon to slaves, while at the same time we should not doubt we should not doubt that he carried with him from his youth a profound sense of rage against the violence and the degradation degradation he both witnessed and experienced. If a slave was thoughtful and dreamed of something better, Douglas believed he must endure these extremes. As autobiographer, he ultimately imposed a rather romantic, individualistic, self made hero on his readers. But crafty and guarded as a writer, he nevertheless revealed a childhood laden with the traumas unique to slavery. Laden. Laden. Those traumas were a kind of emotional furniture in his psyche. He would forever try to control and rearrange them, but he could never fully expunge them. That emotional furniture may have darkened his outlook, but it also provided the wellspring of his great personal story. Douglas made the nature and history of slavery his youthful inquiry. He maintained, we are led, as his readers, on the journey of an involving brilliant mind's bitter questioning of all around him. Why am I